The cold seeps through my blouse like fingers of ice pressing against my spine, and I cannot stop shaking. My wrists burn where the rope bites into skin, and every breath I drag into my lungs tastes of rust and motor oil and fear. The warehouse stretches around me in shadows and concrete, bare bulbs swinging overhead casting pools of sickly yellow light that do nothing to warm this place. I blink hard trying to clear my vision, but tears and terror blur everything at the edges, and all I can see clearly is the nightmare unfolding 10 feet in front of me. Thomas is on his knees, his hands are bound behind his back, and blood drips from a cut above his eye, and he is begging. The words tumble from his lips in a desperate stream, promises and pleas and bargains he cannot possibly keep. I have never seen him like this. Thomas who held my hand at my sister's funeral, Thomas who reads Lily bedtime stories in funny voices, Thomas who is the only family I have left. And standing over him like death itself is a man I have only heard whispered about in frightened rumors. Alexander Ravenscroft. He holds the gun with the casual ease of someone who has held 1,000 guns, and his finger rests against the trigger like it belongs there. He is tall and lean, and dressed in a suit that costs more than I make in 3 months, and his face is carved from something harder than stone. Beautiful in the way a blade is beautiful. Sharp cheekbones and a jaw that could cut glass, and eyes so pale they look almost silver in this dim light. Those eyes hold nothing. No mercy, no hesitation, no humanity. I struggle against my restraints, and the chair scrapes against the floor, and his gaze flicks to me for a single heartbeat before dismissing me entirely. I am nothing to him. An inconvenience. A witness who will need to be dealt with later. The thought sends ice flooding through my veins. Thomas, please, I try to scream, but my voice comes out cracked and small, swallowed by the vastness of this terrible space. Alexander tilts his head slightly, like a predator considering wounded prey. "You owe me money, Thomas," he says, and his voice is low and smooth, and utterly devoid of warmth. "You made promises you could not keep. You know what happens to men who break promises to me." Thomas sobs openly now, and the sound shatters something inside my chest. I think of Lily at home with the babysitter. I think of her waiting for us to come back. I think of her growing up without a father, without an aunt, without anyone, and I pull so hard against the ropes that I feel blood start to slide down my palms. Please, God, please let someone save us. Please let there be a way out of this. Alexander raises the gun, and Thomas screams, and I close my eyes because I cannot watch this. I cannot bear to see. And then from somewhere in the darkness behind me, a small voice calls out, "Mommy, now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you." My eyes fly open and my heart stops beating entirely because I know that voice better than I know my own name. Lily, my baby, my daughter. She is here in this warehouse of death and blood and monsters, and the scream that tears from my throat is something primal, something beyond language. No, 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 she cannot be here. She was supposed to be safe at home with the babysitter. She was supposed to be far away from this nightmare. But she is running now, her small figure emerging from the shadows at the far end of the warehouse, her pink nightgown trailing behind her like a ghost, and I can see the guard who was holding her reaching for her too late as she slips through his fingers like water. Time fractures into 1,000 pieces. Each second stretches into eternity as I watch my daughter sprint across the concrete floor toward the tableau of violence, toward Thomas on his knees, toward the man with the gun. I am screaming her name over and over, but she does not stop. She does not even look at me. Her entire world narrowed to the father figure who has tucked her in every night since her mother died. She throws herself between Alexander and Thomas, with all the fierce bravery of a child who does not understand that bullets do not care about love. Her small arms spread wide, as if she could shield a grown man with her tiny body, and her voice rings out through the warehouse clear and high and desperate. Please do not shoot my daddy. Please, please, please do not shoot my daddy." The words hit Alexander Ravenscroft like physical blows. I watch it happen. I watch the way his entire body goes rigid, the way his finger tightens on the trigger for one terrible instant before something shifts in those cold silver eyes. Something cracks. Something breaks open. His jaw clenches so hard I can see the muscle jumping beneath his skin, and his chest rises and falls with a breath that seems to cost him something precious. The gun wavers. Lily is sobbing now, her hands fisted in Thomas's bloody shirt, her face buried against his chest, and she keeps saying it over and over like a prayer, like a spell, like the only words she knows. "Please do not shoot my daddy. I love my daddy, please, please, please." Alexander stares down at her, and I stare at him, and I do not understand what I am seeing. There is something ancient and wounded moving behind his eyes, something that has nothing to do with the cold, ruthless man who was ready to execute Thomas moments ago. He looks at this child, this innocent, fragile thing standing between his gun and its target, and I watch the predator in him go utterly still. Slowly, so slowly it feels like watching a glacier move, he lowers the weapon. The barrel drops inch by inch until it points at the floor. He takes one step backward, then another. And I realize I am crying because my daughter just saved Thomas's life, and I do not know why, and I do not know what happens next, but Alexander Ravenscroft is looking at Lily like she is a ghost he recognizes. The silence that follows is worse than the screaming. Lily clings to Thomas, her small body shaking with sobs, and I cannot move, cannot think, cannot do anything but stare at the gun, now hanging at Alexander Ravenscroft's side. He has not holstered it yet. His finger still rests near the trigger, but he is not looking at Thomas anymore. He is looking at me. Those silver eyes find mine across the warehouse, and I feel the weight of his gaze like a physical pressure against my chest, like he is reaching inside me and reading every terrified thought racing through my mind. He sees everything, my fear, my desperation, my absolute helplessness. And something else moves behind his expression, some calculation I cannot decipher. He turns to one of his men and speaks quietly, words I cannot hear from this distance, and then he is walking toward me with slow, deliberate steps that echo through the cavernous space. Each footfall sounds like a countdown. He stops in front of my chair, and I have to crane my neck to look up at him, and from this angle, he is even more terrifying. All sharp edges and cold beauty, and the faint scent of expensive cologne mixed with something metallic that might be blood. "Your brother-in-law owes me $500, he says, and his voice is conversational, almost pleasant, as if we are discussing the weather rather than a death sentence. Someone is going to pay that debt." I open my mouth, but no words come out. My throat is raw from screaming, and my mind is blank with terror, and all I can think is that Lily is watching, my baby is watching, and whatever happens next, she will remember it forever. He crouches down so we are eye level, and this close I can see the faint scar that runs along his jawline, and the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes that suggest he is older than he first appeared. His gaze drops to my bleeding wrists, and something flickers across his face too fast for me to name. "You are an accountant," he says. It is not a question. He knows. Of course he knows. Men like him know everything about their targets before they ever pull the trigger. "I work at a small firm," I manage to whisper. "Nothing special. Nothing that could possibly be worth $500,000. He tilts his head and studies me like I am a problem he is solving, and I realize with sudden clarity that my life depends on whatever solution he reaches. "I find myself in need of someone with your particular skills," he says slowly. "Someone who can make my legitimate business interests look exactly as legitimate as they should be. Someone who understands numbers and discretion and consequences." I stare at him, uncomprehending. "You want me to cook your books? I want you to clean them," he corrects, and there is a difference in his tone that suggests the distinction matters. "I have businesses that operate within the law. I need someone who can ensure they stay that way. Someone who has motivation to be thorough." His eyes slide toward Lily still crying in Thomas's arms, and I understand the threat without him speaking it aloud. "Work for me," he says. "Live at my estate. Do exactly as I instruct until the debt is paid, and your family stays breathing." I look at Thomas, at Lily, at the men with guns surrounding us. There is no choice here. There never was. "I will do it," I say, and my voice does not shake, and I do not know where I find the strength, but I hold his gaze as I seal my fate. His smile is brief and cold, and utterly without warmth. "I thought you might." He stands and gestures to his men, and suddenly they are cutting Thomas free and carrying Lily toward the door, and I am screaming, "Wait, wait, please let me hold her," but Alexander's hand closes around my arm and his grip is iron. "They go home," he says quietly. "You come with me." The car is black and sleek and silent as it carries me away from the warehouse, and away from my daughter's fading cries, and I press my forehead against the cold window and watch the city lights blur into streaks of color through my tears. I do not know where we are going. I do not know what awaits me. I only know that Lily's face is burned into my memory, her small hand reaching for me as Thomas pulled her toward their car, her voice calling, "Mommy, mommy, mommy," until the warehouse doors closed between us. The driver does not speak. The guard beside me does not speak. I am alone with my terror and my grief, and the throbbing pain in my wrists, where the rope bit into my skin. We drive for what feels like hours through neighborhoods I do not recognize, past iron gates and stone walls and estates that grow larger and more imposing, until finally we turn onto a private road lined with ancient oaks, and I see it rising before us like something from a dark fairy tale. The Ravenscroft estate is a sprawling mansion of gray stone and Gothic architecture, all pointed arches and tall windows that gleam with warm light against the darkness. It should be beautiful. Instead, it feels like a gilded cage, like a pretty prison designed to make you forget you cannot leave. The car stops at the main entrance and the guard opens my door, and I step out on legs that tremble. A woman in a crisp black uniform meets me at the door, and her face is carefully blank, as she leads me through a foyer of marble floors and crystal chandeliers, and up a sweeping staircase to the east wing. "Your room," she says, and opens a door to reveal a space that is larger than my entire apartment. Four-poster bed draped in silk, antique furniture that probably costs more than I make in a year. A window overlooking manicured gardens that might as well be a painted backdrop for all the freedom they represent. "The rules are simple," the woman continues, and her voice is pleasant and utterly without warmth. "You do not leave the estate without permission. You do not contact anyone without approval. You do not enter the West Wing. Meals will be brought to you until Mr. Ravenscroft decides otherwise." She leaves before I can respond, and I hear the lock click into place from outside. I sink onto the edge of the bed, and I do not cry because I have no tears left. I am still sitting there when footsteps sound in the hallway outside, and I look up to see a man watching me through the open doorway, and I do not know when it opened. He is tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair silvering at the temples and eyes that miss nothing. "Henry Sinclair," he says, and the name carries weight and warning. "I manage the household and I manage problems. Do not become a problem." He studies me like I am an equation he is solving, and then he is gone. And in the space he leaves, I glimpse Alexander Ravenscroft passing in the corridor beyond. He does not look at me, but I look at him, and I notice his hands for the first time without a gun in them. Long fingers, elegant bones, the hands of a pianist or a surgeon, hands that could create or destroy with equal precision. He disappears around a corner, and I am left with the ghost of his presence, and the terrible awareness that those beautiful, lethal hands now hold my entire life. The summons comes on my third morning in the gilded cage. A guard whose name I do not know opens my door without knocking and tells me Mr. Ravenscroft expects me in his office in 10 minutes, and I am given no choice but to follow him through corridors. I am still learning, past paintings that cost more than my entire life savings, down a staircase that curves like a serpent's spine into the heart of the mansion. The office is everything I expected, and nothing I was prepared for. Dark wood paneling that absorbs the light, bookshelves lined with leather volumes that look like they have never been opened. A massive desk that dominates the room like a throne, and behind it sits Alexander Ravenscroft, watching me enter with those silver eyes that see too much. He does not stand. He does not greet me. He simply gestures to the chair across from him, and I sit because what else can I do? And the leather is cold against my back, and I am acutely aware that the door has closed behind me, and we are alone. He slides a stack of documents across the polished surface, and his fingers are long and elegant, and I remember thinking they belonged to a pianist or a surgeon, and now I think they belong to a predator who has learned to wear civilization like a mask. These are the financial records for 7 of my legitimate businesses, he says, and his voice is cool and measured, and utterly without inflection. A restaurant chain, 2 hotels, a construction company, a shipping firm. I need you to audit them and identify any irregularities that might attract unwanted attention. I reach for the papers, and our fingers nearly touch, and I pull back too quickly, and I see the corner of his mouth twitch with something that might be amusement or might be contempt. You want me to find problems so you can hide them better? I say, and I do not know where the defiance comes from, but it rises in my throat like bile. No, he says, and there is a sharpness in his voice now, a blade beneath the silk. I want you to find problems so I can fix them. These businesses are legitimate. I intend for them to stay that way. The distinction seems meaningless to me, but I do not say so. Instead, I flip through the first pages and I see numbers that do not add up and patterns that whisper of carelessness or incompetence, and despite everything, I feel the familiar pull of a puzzle demanding to be solved. Your previous accountant was either lazy or stealing from you, I say, and his eyes flash with something that looks almost like interest. Both, he replies. He is no longer a concern. The implication hangs in the air between us, heavy and cold, and I decide I do not want to know what happened to my predecessor. I look up and find him studying me with an intensity that makes my skin prickle. You expected ledgers full of blood money, he says, bodies hidden in the balance sheets. I did not answer, but my face must betray me because he leans forward, and the distance between us shrinks, and I can smell his cologne again, expensive and dark. I am many things, Miss Ashford, but I am not stupid. I keep my sins separate from my legitimate interests. Your job is to protect the legitimate. He pauses and something shifts behind his eyes. Unless you would prefer to return to that warehouse and renegotiate our arrangement. I hold his gaze and I do not flinch, and somewhere deep inside me a spark of something that is not quite hatred flickers to life. I will need access to your banking records, I say, and your previous tax filings, and whatever passes for oversight in your organization. He stares at me for a long moment, and then he smiles, and it transforms his face into something almost human and infinitely more dangerous. Done, he says. And I realize with sudden clarity that I am not just his prisoner. I am a puzzle he is solving too. They bring her to me on the 7th day, and I am not prepared for the way my heart cracks open at the sight of her. Lily runs across the marble foyer with her arms outstretched, and her dark curls bouncing, and she slams into my legs with enough force to nearly knock me down. And I drop to my knees and I hold her so tightly I'm afraid I might break her, but I cannot let go. I cannot let go. I cannot let go. She smells like strawberry shampoo and the laundry detergent Thomas uses, and something that is purely her, purely my daughter, purely the only thing in this world that matters. Mommy, I missed you, she says into my neck, and her small fingers grip my shirt, and I am crying now, tears streaming down my face without shame. Because she is here, she is real, she is in my arms. Thomas stands awkwardly by the door, flanked by 2 guards, and he looks thinner than I remember, and there are shadows under his eyes that speak of sleepless nights, and I want to hate him for bringing us to this place. But I cannot, because he loves Lily too. has loved her since my sister placed her in his arms moments after birth. I pull back just enough to look at my daughter's face, and she is studying me with those serious brown eyes that are so much like Sarah's, like my dead sister's, and she reaches up to wipe the tears from my cheeks with clumsy, gentle fingers. "Why are you crying, Mommy?" she asks. "Are you sad in this big house?" "I am happy to see you, baby," I tell her, and my voice breaks on the words. "I am so happy to see you." We sit together on a velvet settee in what I have learned is called the morning room, and Lily chatters about her kindergarten class and her new friend Marcus and the butterfly she saw in Thomas's garden, and I drink in every word like water in a desert. Thomas watches us from across the room, and the guards watch Thomas. And somewhere in the doorway behind me, I feel another presence, a weight of attention that makes my skin prickle with awareness. "Mommy," Lily whispers, and she tugs at my sleeve and her eyes are fixed on something over my shoulder. "Is the scary man nice now?" I turn and Alexander Ravenscroft stands in the doorway with his hands clasped behind his back, and his face is carved from marble, cold and remote, and utterly unreadable. I open my mouth to answer, but before I can speak, Lily waves at him, a small flutter of her fingers, and she smiles that gap-toothed smile that has destroyed me since the day she was born. "Hi, scary man," she says with the fearless innocence of childhood. "I like your big house." Something happens to his face. It is not a smile. It is barely a movement at all. But something cracks behind his silver eyes, some wall fractures just enough for light to slip through, and he nods once, a single precise acknowledgement, and then he turns and walks away, and I am left staring at the empty doorway, wondering what wounds a child's smile could possibly find in a man made of ice. The visit lasts 2 hours, and when they take her away, I feel pieces of myself leaving with her, and I wonder if Alexander Ravenscroft has ever felt his heart walk away in someone else's body. I hear the name for the first time on the 10th day of my captivity, and it settles into my bones like a premonition of disaster. I am walking past the study when voices leak through the heavy oak door, Henry Sinclair's measured tones mixing with another man's rougher cadence, and I should keep walking, but something makes me stop, makes me press myself against the wall and strain to catch their words. "Crawford is making moves on the Eastern Territory," Henry says, and there is tension wound tight through every syllable. "3 shipments intercepted this month alone. He is testing our borders, seeing how far he can push before we push back." The other man grunts something I cannot hear, but Henry's response is clear enough. "Alexander will not let this stand, not after what Crawford's father did to his. There is history here, blood debt going back a decade, and men like them do not forget." My heart pounds against my ribs, and I know I should move, should retreat to my room and pretend I heard nothing. But my feet remain rooted to the floor, and I listen as they discuss territories and shipments and names that mean nothing to me and everything at once. "Crawford runs the gambling rings on the south side," Henry continues. "The underground games, the high-stakes tables where desperate men lose everything they have. I think of Thomas and his debt, and something cold slithers through my stomach. "That is where your brother-in-law found his trouble," the other man says, and I press my hand to my mouth to keep from gasping aloud. Crawford's tables. Crawford's game. Crawford's trap. The coincidence feels too sharp to be accidental, and my accountant's mind begins running numbers, calculating odds, tracing patterns that do not quite add up. Why would a crime boss care about Thomas's gambling debts? Why would he let that debt transfer to Alexander Ravenscroft? The puzzle pieces scatter before me, but they hint at a picture I cannot yet see. Footsteps approach the door, and I move quickly, silently, ducking into an alcove and pressing myself into the shadows as Henry emerges. He pauses for a moment, his head tilting as if he senses something amiss. But then he continues down the hallway, and I release the breath I did not know I was holding. That night I lie in my gilded bed, and I think about blood debts and territory wars and the complicated web I have stumbled into. Alexander's father was killed by Crawford's men. The words echo through my skull, and I wonder what kind of man carries that weight, what kind of son inherits that legacy of violence and vengeance. I think about the way his eyes went empty when he held the gun to Thomas's head, and the way they cracked open when Lily waved her small fingers at him, and I realize I am starting to see him as something more than a monster. The thought terrifies me more than the gun ever did, because monsters are simple, monsters are easy to hate, but complicated men with wounded pasts and strict codes and eyes that see too much, those are dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with violence. I pull the silk sheets to my chin, and I wonder what James Crawford wants, and why my brother-in-law's debt feels like the first move in a game I do not understand. Sleep refuses to come on the 14th night, and I find myself wandering the silent hallways of the mansion like a ghost in silk pajamas, my bare feet cold against the marble floors, and my mind churning with questions that have no answers. The library door is cracked open, and amber light spills across the floor, and I should turn back, should retreat to my room, and stare at the ceiling until dawn. But something pulls me forward, some invisible thread that I do not understand and cannot resist. He sits in a leather chair by the dying fire, a crystal glass in his hand and a bottle of whiskey on the table beside him, and he does not look surprised to see me standing in the doorway like a nervous specter. I could not sleep, I say, and my voice sounds too loud in the hushed space. Neither could I, he replies, and he gestures to the chair across from him with a grace that makes the simple movement look like an invitation and a command all at once. I should refuse, but my feet carry me forward, and I sink into the leather, and the firelight plays across his features, softening the sharp edges, revealing shadows beneath his eyes that speak of sleepless nights that have nothing to do with me. He pours a second glass without asking and slides it across the table, and our fingers do not touch, but the air between them feels charged with something electric. "Your daughter," he says, and the word sounds strange in his mouth, unfamiliar but careful. "She has her mother's eyes. She has my sister's eyes," I correct him, and the old grief stirs in my chest. "Sarah died when Lily was 3. Car accident on a rainy highway, and Thomas and I have been raising her together ever since." He absorbs this information in silence, turning the glass in his elegant, lethal hands, and when he speaks again, his voice is lower, rougher. "I am sorry," he says, and I think he means it. I take a sip of the whiskey, and it burns down my throat and loosens something in my chest, and I ask the question that has haunted me since the warehouse. "Why did you lower the gun?" His jaw tightens, and for a long moment I think he will not answer, think he will retreat behind his walls of ice and silence. But then he looks at the fire and his profile is carved from shadow and flame. "Children should not pay for the sins of their fathers," he says. And there is something old and wounded buried in the words. No child should stand between a gun and the person they love. She should never have been in that room, should never have seen what she saw, and that is a failure I will carry. I stare at him and I see it now, the fracture lines running through his frozen exterior, the humanity he buries beneath the monster. Somewhere in his past, a child paid for sins that were not his, and the scar still bleeds. "Who hurt you?" I whisper before I can stop myself. His silver eyes meet mine, and the fire crackles, and the night stretches endless around us. "Everyone," he says simply, and I believe him. The gunfire shatters the quiet of the 17th night, and I am torn from sleep by the sound of violence erupting across the estate grounds. I scramble from the bed, my heart a wild animal in my chest, and I barely reach the door before it flies open and Alexander is there, his silver eyes blazing with something feral and urgent. "Come with me," he commands, and his hand closes around my wrist, and he pulls me into the hallway before I can form a single word. The mansion has transformed into a battlefield, shouting voices and the crack of gunshots echoing through the marble corridors, and I see guards running past us with weapons drawn and faces grim. Crawford's men breached the eastern wall, Alexander says as he drags me down a passage I have never seen before, his body angled between me and every doorway we pass, every shadow that might conceal a threat. He moves like a predator, all coiled muscle and lethal grace, and I realize I am seeing the monster that whispered beneath his elegant surface, the creature that built an empire on blood and fear. We round a corner and two men appear from nowhere, dressed in black and armed with death in their hands. And Alexander releases me only to become something terrifying, something beautiful in its brutality. He moves faster than I can track, disarming the first man with a strike that cracks bone, spinning to put a bullet through the second before he can raise his weapon. The efficiency steals my breath. The violence should horrify me, but instead I feel a terrible gratitude because this monster is fighting for me. A third man emerges from the shadows, and Alexander turns but not fast enough, and I watch the knife slice across his shoulder, watch the dark bloom of blood spread across his white shirt, watch him kill the man anyway with hands that do not shake. He grabs me again and we run, my bare feet slapping against cold stone, until he pulls me into a hidden room behind a false panel in the library wall. The space is small and dark, and he presses me against the wall, and I can feel his blood soaking through my thin pajamas, where his shoulder presses against me. "You are hurt," I whisper, and my hands find the wound in the darkness, press against the hot, wet flow of his life, leaking through my fingers. "It is nothing," he says, but his voice is tight and his breathing is ragged. My hands tremble against his torn flesh, and I am terrified and furious, and something else, something that has no name but burns through my veins like fire. His hand comes up to cover mine, warm and steady despite the blood, and I feel his pulse beneath my palm, feel the proof that he is alive, that he put himself between me and death. Our eyes meet in the shadows, and I cannot look away from the intensity in his gaze, the raw, unguarded something that flickers through the silver. "You are safe," he breathes, and I realize that is all that matters to him. Charlotte finds us in the hidden room, and her face goes pale when she sees the blood soaking through her brother's shirt. But she does not panic, does not cry out, just helps me guide him through the secured corridors to his private quarters, while guards sweep the estate for any remaining threats. His bedroom is larger than my entire apartment used to be, all dark wood and heavy curtains, and a bed that dominates the space like a throne. And Charlotte brings me a medical kit with steady hands and tells me she taught herself basic field medicine years ago because men in their world bleed too often to wait for doctors. She shows me how to clean the wound, how to thread the curved needle, how to pull torn flesh together with stitches that will hold, and then she leaves us alone with a look in her eyes that says she sees something I am not ready to name. Alexander sits on the edge of his bed, his ruined shirt discarded, his chest bare and sculpted and scarred with the history of violence written across his skin, and I stand between his knees with the needle in my trembling fingers and try to focus on the task instead of the heat radiating from his body. "This will hurt," I warn him, and he laughs, a low, rough sound that I have never heard before. "Everything hurts," he says, but his eyes are fixed on my face with an intensity that makes my breath catch. I push the needle through his flesh, and he does not flinch, does not make a sound, just watches me with those silver eyes that see too much and reveal too little. My hands shake as I work, and I feel his breath stirring my hair, and I am acutely aware of how close we are, how my hip presses against his thigh, how his hands rest on the mattress beside him with deliberate stillness. "Why do you trust me?" I ask without looking up from my careful stitches. "You could be working for Crawford. You could be anyone." "I do not understand it," he admits, and his voice is quiet, almost wondering. "I have trusted no one in years. I have built my empire on suspicion and blood. But you stood in my library and asked who hurt me, and I wanted to answer. I wanted to tell you everything."
I tie off the final stitch, and my hands linger on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steady pulse of life beneath my palms. I do not understand why I care if you live, I confess, and the words taste like surrender. You held a gun to my family. You took my freedom. I should hate you. But when I saw that knife cut through you, I felt something break inside my chest. He reaches up and his fingers brush my jaw, tilting my face until our eyes meet, and the air between us crackles with something that terrifies me more than any gun. You are not my prisoner anymore, he says. I do not know what you are. I do not know what this is. But I know that when Crawford's man raised that blade, I thought only of getting back to you. His thumb traces my cheekbone, and I cannot breathe, and the world narrows to this room, this man, this moment suspended between past and future. The numbers swim before my eyes in the pale light of dawn, and I have been staring at these financial records for hours, searching for something I cannot name, driven by a gnawing instinct that has kept me awake since Alexander's thumb traced fire across my cheekbone. The attack changed everything and nothing. He has not touched me again, has barely looked at me, but the air between us crackles with unspoken things whenever we occupy the same room. I bury myself in work because work is safe, because numbers do not make my heart race or my skin flush, because columns and figures cannot look at me with silver eyes that promise danger and something worse. But these numbers are wrong. I noticed it 3 days ago, a discrepancy in the records of the gambling establishment where Thomas accumulated his debt, a pattern that should not exist. I pull the threads and the tapestry unravels, and what I find beneath makes my blood run cold. The gambling ring was not random. Thomas did not stumble into debt through weakness or bad luck. He was guided there, steered by dealers who extended credit they should never have offered, by games that were rigged to ensure his losses, by a systematic campaign to bury him in exactly the amount of debt that would bring him to Alexander Ravenscroft's attention. The origin point traces back through shell companies and false names, but I am good at my job, perhaps the best, and I follow the money until it leads me to a name I recognize. Crawford. James Crawford orchestrated everything. He built the trap and baited it with Thomas, and I cannot understand why until I dig deeper and find the connection that stops my heart. My old firm. The accounting firm where I worked before that night in the warehouse. The firm that handled financial records for half the legitimate businesses in this city. The firm that had recently taken on a new client, whose holdings I now recognize as Crawford's front companies. He wanted access. He wanted someone inside that firm, and he chose me, and he used Thomas to get to me. But I never worked for Crawford. I never saw his files, unless he did not want me to work for him at all, unless he wanted me somewhere else. I request a supervised call with Thomas, and my hands shake as I wait for the connection. His face appears on the screen, haggard and haunted, and I ask him directly. I ask him who introduced him to that gambling room, who encouraged him to keep playing, who suggested that Alexander Ravenscroft might be more merciful than other creditors. He breaks. He crumbles before my eyes and confesses that a man approached him months before the debt grew unmanageable. A man who said he worked for someone who needed information about the Ravenscroft organization, someone who would forgive all debts if Thomas could just get close enough. They wanted me here. Crawford wanted me inside Alexander's house, near his records, near his secrets. I was never meant to pay a debt. I was meant to be a weapon. The target was always Alexander, and I was always the bullet aimed at his heart. I find him in his office, standing at the window with his back to the door, and the tension in his shoulders tells me he already knows something is wrong. I have spent an hour pacing my room, rehearsing what I will say, preparing for the moment when his silver eyes turn cold and suspicious, and he decides I have been the enemy all along. But I cannot hide this. I cannot pretend I do not know what Crawford did, what Thomas did, what I was meant to be.
Alexander turns when he hears me enter, and his gaze sweeps over my face, cataloging the fear I cannot conceal, the documents clutched in my trembling hands. "Tell me," he says, and it is not a request. I lay out everything, the rigged games, the manufactured debt, the shell companies tracing back to Crawford, the plan to plant me inside his organization, to use me as a weapon against him. I wait for his fury to fall on me, for him to see the trap and assume I am part of it, for him to become again the cold man who held a gun to Thomas's head in a warehouse that smells like rust and fear. But when the anger comes, it does not touch me. It burns past me like a wildfire seeking other fuel, and his hands curl into fists at his sides, and a muscle jumps in his jaw, and for a moment I see the predator beneath the polished surface, the violence that has built an empire and held it against all challengers. "Crawford," he says, and the name is a curse. "He used your family. He used you. He manipulated us both and put you in my path like a piece on a board, and I did not see it. I did not question why a small-time gambling debt required my personal attention. I let Henry handle the collection because the numbers were clean enough, and I never thought to look deeper." His voice drops to something dangerous, something that vibrates with barely contained rage. "He played me for a fool. I should have known." I step closer, drawn by an instinct I do not fully understand, and I lay my hand on his arm and feel the coiled tension beneath his sleeve. "I am not working for Crawford," I tell him, "and I need him to believe me. I never was. I did not know about any of this until I found the records. Thomas was desperate and scared, and Crawford exploited that, but I am not his agent. I am not his weapon. I am just an accountant who stumbled into a war she did not know existed." He looks at my hand on his arm and then at my face, and something in his expression shifts, softens, becomes almost tender beneath the fury. "I know," he says. "If you were Crawford's creature, you would not have told me any of this. You would have gathered secrets and slipped them to him and watched me fall. But you came to me with the truth, and that makes you something else entirely." His hand covers mine, and his thumb strokes across my knuckles, and when he speaks again, his voice carries the weight of a vow. "Crawford will pay for what he has done to your family, to us. And until he does, you are under my protection, not as payment for a debt, but because I choose it, because I will not let him touch what is mine." Days pass, and the rhythm of the estate shifts around me like a tide changing direction. I am no longer a prisoner in any meaningful sense, though I remain within these walls. Alexander seeks me out now, not to command, but to consult, appearing in the doorway of my makeshift office with questions about legitimate acquisitions and corporate structures and the subtle art of making money without leaving traces that could be followed by federal investigators. I challenge him when his assumptions are wrong, and he listens, actually listens, his silver eyes tracking my face as I explain why a particular investment is foolish or why a shell company needs restructuring. We argue about depreciation, schedules, and he almost smiles. We debate the merits of offshore accounts, and his hand brushes mine when he reaches for a document, and neither of us acknowledges the electricity that crackles between our skin. Charlotte finds me in the garden one afternoon, her honey-colored hair catching the autumn light, and she sits beside me on a stone bench and studies my face with an intensity that reminds me painfully of her brother. "You have changed him," she says without preamble. "I have not seen Alexander like this since before our mother died. He was 19 when Crawford's men killed her. Did you know that? She was not supposed to be in that car. Father was the target, but she took the bullet meant for him, and something in Alexander went dark that day. He became the weapon our father needed, cold and sharp and merciless, and I thought that boy was gone forever. But he looks at you the way he used to look at the world, like there might be something worth protecting in it after all." Her words settle into my chest and take root there, growing into something I cannot name, or perhaps something I am afraid to name. I find myself watching for him in hallways and listening for his footsteps, and feeling the absence of him like a physical ache when he is called away to handle the business of empire. We pass each other in doorways, and our shoulders brush, and he steadies me with a hand on my waist, and lets it linger a heartbeat too long. He brings me coffee in the mornings now, dark and bitter the way I like it, and he remembers the way I take it, and I wonder when he learned. I watch him with Lily during her visits, and see the careful gentleness he shows her, crouching to her level, listening to her endless stories about her stuffed rabbit, and my heart does something dangerous in my chest. He is not the monster I thought he was. He is something far more complicated, a man shaped by violence who still remembers how to be tender, a predator who chooses mercy when no one would blame him for cruelty. I am falling for him. The realization crashes over me one evening when he laughs at something I say, a real laugh that transforms his face and steals my breath, and I know with terrifying certainty that I am already lost. I have fallen for a dangerous man, and I cannot bring myself to regret it. The call comes at 3 in the afternoon, and it shatters everything. I am in my office reviewing acquisition documents when Alexander appears in the doorway, and his face tells me, before his words do, that something terrible has happened. "Crawford's men," he says, and my blood turns to ice. "They tried to take Lily from Thomas's apartment." My legs give out, and I grab the edge of the desk to keep from falling, and the world narrows to a single point of blinding terror. Lily, my daughter, my baby. Crawford tried to take her, and I was not there to protect her, and every nightmare I have ever had crystallizes into this single moment of absolute horror. Alexander catches me before I crumble, his hands strong on my arms, and his voice cuts through the panic like a blade. "She is safe," he says firmly. "My men intercepted them. She is frightened but unharmed, and they are bringing her here now. She will be here within the hour, and I swear to you, Eleanor, no one will touch her again." I cannot breathe. I cannot think. I can only see Lily's face in my mind, her wide brown eyes and her gap-toothed smile and her tiny hands that reach for me when she is scared. And the thought of Crawford's men putting their hands on her makes me want to scream until my throat bleeds. Alexander pulls me against his chest and holds me while I shake, and his heartbeat is steady beneath my ear, an anchor in the storm of my fear. "I will kill them," he says into my hair, and his voice is terrifyingly calm. "Anyone who touched her, anyone who planned this, anyone who even looked at your daughter with the intention of harm. They will die slowly, and they will die knowing why." I should be horrified by the violence in his words. I should recoil from the promise of death delivered so casually, so certainly. But instead, I press closer to him and feel the predator coiled beneath his skin, and I am grateful. I am grateful for his ruthlessness and his power and his capacity for destruction, because right now those things stand between my daughter and the monsters who would use her to hurt me. The moral complexity of it does not escape me. I am embracing a killer because his violence serves my purposes, because his darkness protects my light, because in this world of territories and blood debts, the only safety comes from being claimed by something more dangerous than what hunts you. When Lily arrives, she runs to me, and I catch her and hold her so tight I am afraid I will break her. She is crying and trembling, and she buries her face in my neck, and I rock her like I did when she was an infant. "Bad men came," she whispers. "But Mr. Alexander's friends stopped them." She pulls back to look at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I was so scared, Mommy." I look up and find Alexander watching us from the doorway, his silver eyes soft with something that looks like pain, and I understand with sudden clarity that he will burn the world down before he lets Crawford touch her again. My daughter is safe. My monster will keep her that way. The attack comes at midnight when the estate is quiet, and I am finally sleeping for the first time in days, with Lily curled against my side in my bed. The explosion rocks the foundation, and I am awake instantly, grabbing my daughter before the sound even registers in my conscious mind.
my body moving on pure instinct honed by weeks of living in a world where violence waits around every corner. Lily screams, and I clamp my hand over her mouth and whisper against her ear that she must be quiet, that Mommy needs her to be so brave right now, and she nods with tears streaming down her face, and I have never been more proud of anyone in my life. Gunfire erupts somewhere in the house, rapid and close and terrifying, and I remember what Alexander told me 3 days ago when he walked me through the hidden passages that thread through the estate like veins through a body. If anything happens, he said, you take Lily and you run to the panic room behind the library and you do not open that door for anyone but me. I drag Lily from the bed and we run barefoot through the darkness. And I know these halls now, know them like I know my own heartbeat. And we slip through the hidden door behind the tapestry in the east corridor and into the narrow passage beyond. Lily clings to my neck, and her small body shakes with silent sobs, and I keep moving, one hand on the wall to guide us, counting the turns Alexander made me memorize, until I find the cold steel door of the panic room. My fingers tremble as I punch in the code, and the door swings open, and I pull us inside and seal it behind us, and finally allow myself to breathe. The room is small and reinforced and stocked with supplies, and there is a monitor showing security feeds, but half of them are static now, destroyed or disabled, and the ones that work show chaos. Men fighting in hallways, bodies on the ground, fire spreading through the West Wing. And Alexander. I see Alexander on one of the feeds, fighting 3 men at once with brutal efficiency, and I watch him take a knife to the ribs and keep fighting, and my heart stops beating in my chest. Lily whispers that she is scared, and I hold her tighter and tell her it will be okay, even though I do not know if that is true. The feeds cut out one by one, until there is nothing but static and silence, and I am left in the dark with my daughter and my terror and the memory of Alexander bleeding on a security screen. Minutes pass, or maybe hours, and I hear nothing, and the silence is worse than the gunfire, because at least the gunfire meant he was still fighting. Then footsteps in the passage outside. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. Lily buries her face in my chest, and I position myself between her and the door and prepare to fight with my bare hands if I must. The handle turns. It is Alexander. He stands in the doorway with blood streaming down his face and his shirt torn and stained crimson, and he is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. He says my name like a prayer, like a curse, like the only word he knows, and I am in his arms before I realize I have moved, pressing myself against his wounded body and feeling his heart pound against mine. He is alive. He is alive, and he came for us, and the relief is so overwhelming that I cannot breathe around it. Lily reaches for him too, and he pulls her into the embrace, holding us both against his chest. And for one perfect moment, we are a tangle of limbs and tears and desperate gratitude. He leads us through the ruined estate, stepping over debris and bodies that I do not let myself look at, and the west wing smolders in the distance, but the core of the house stands intact. His men are everywhere, securing rooms and tending to wounded, and the organized chaos of aftermath swirls around us. Alexander takes us to his quarters, the only part of the estate untouched by the violence, and he locks the door behind us, and finally allows himself to sag against it. I make him sit while I check his wounds, finding cuts and bruises, but nothing fatal, nothing that will take him from me, and my hands shake as I clean the blood from his face with a wet cloth. Lily falls asleep on his bed, exhausted by terror and tears, her small body curled into a protective ball, and I watch her breathe and feel something fundamental shift in my chest. Alexander watches me watch her. "You could have died," I whisper, and my voice breaks on the words. He reaches for me then, his bloodied fingers gentle on my jaw, tilting my face until our eyes meet. "I could not," he says simply. "You were waiting. I do not know who moves first. Perhaps we both do,
drawn together by gravity and need and the desperate recognition that we almost lost this before we ever had it. His mouth finds mine, and the kiss is everything at once, desperate and claiming and tender beyond measure, tasting of blood and smoke and the salt of my tears. I pour myself into him, all my fear and relief and the love I have been denying, and he drinks it down like a man dying of thirst. His hands frame my face like I am something precious, and I grip his ruined shirt like it is the only thing keeping me tethered to the earth. When we finally break apart, we are both breathing hard, and his forehead rests against mine. I cannot lose you, he says, and the words are raw and broken, and more honest than anything he has ever said to me. The ice that has protected my heart since my sister died shatters completely, and I feel everything, every terrifying, vulnerable, wonderful thing, and I am not afraid. You will not, I tell him. I am not going anywhere. Lily stirs between us, reaching in her sleep for something to hold, and Alexander takes her small hand in his, and something in his silver eyes softens into something that looks like hope. Henry finds the traitor within 48 hours. A guard named Marcus, who had been with the organization for only 6 months, long enough to learn the patrol schedules and security codes, not long enough to earn the loyalty that might have made him hesitate before selling us to Crawford. I watch through the window of Alexander's study as Henry escorts the man across the courtyard, and I do not ask what will happen to him because I already know, and I have made my peace with the violence that lives in the bones of this world. Alexander stands beside me, close enough that I can feel the heat of his body, and when he speaks his voice is cold in a way it no longer is when he talks to me. Crawford has been planning this for months, he says, uniting the smaller operations under his banner, promising them pieces of Ravenscroft territory once we fall. He turns to face me, and his silver eyes are hard with purpose. War is coming, Eleanor. I cannot stop it. I can only strike first. The words should terrify me, and perhaps they do, somewhere beneath the layers of fear I have accumulated since that night in the warehouse. But what rises to the surface instead is determination. I know something that might help, I tell him, and I watch his expression shift from protective dismissal to reluctant interest as I explain. My old firm handled accounts for several businesses that I now recognize as Crawford fronts. Shell companies layered over shell companies, money flowing through legitimate channels to hide its origins. I know the structures, the account numbers, the routing patterns that Crawford uses to fund his operations. If Alexander can cut off the money, he can cripple Crawford's alliance before it ever truly forms. Alexander is silent for a long moment, and I can see the war on his face between his need to keep me safe and his recognition that I am offering him a weapon he cannot forge himself. You would do this, he says finally. You would put yourself deeper into this world, knowing you can never fully leave it. I step closer to him, close enough to place my hand over his heart and feel it beating steady beneath my palm. I am already in this world, I say. Crawford made sure of that when he targeted Thomas, targeted me, targeted my daughter. The only question is whether I hide from the war or help win it. He covers my hand with his own, and something fierce and tender moves through his expression. You are not what I expected, Eleanor Ashford. You were supposed to be a means to collect a debt. You were supposed to be ordinary. I smile despite everything, despite the danger closing in from all sides. And you were supposed to be a monster. His laugh is quiet and rough, and it warms something in my chest that I thought would never be warm again. Perhaps we were both wrong, he says. He pulls me against him and kisses my forehead with a gentleness that still surprises me from hands that have done such violence. We begin planning that night. Alexander and Henry and me gathered around maps and financial documents while Charlotte watches Lily in the next room. I point out the weaknesses in Crawford's network, the pressure points where money flows through single channels that can be blocked, the businesses that will collapse without constant cash infusion. Alexander listens, asks questions, treats my knowledge as the weapon it is. I am no longer a prisoner or even a guest. I am a partner in a war I never asked for, but will not run from. I choose this. I choose him. I choose to fight for the fragile family we are building from the wreckage of our broken pasts. The night before the strike, we spend hours in Alexander's study, refining every detail of the plan until it is a weapon as precise as the man who wields it. I trace the money flows on paper, showing Henry and the team leaders exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage with minimum exposure. And Alexander watches me with an intensity that makes my skin warm even in the cold focus of strategy. When the others finally leave and the clock shows well past midnight, he locks the door and turns to me, and the commander falls away, leaving only the man. "Come with me," he says, and his voice is softer than I have ever heard it, and he takes my hand and leads me through the quiet halls to a part of the estate I have never seen. A small room filled with photographs and books, and the ghosts of a life lived before violence became his native tongue. "This was her room," he says, and I know without asking that he means his mother. "She died when I was 17 and Charlotte was 12. And after that, my father became something less than human in his grief. And I became something less than human to survive him." He shows me pictures of a woman with Charlotte's gentle eyes and his own sharp cheekbones, and I see the boy he was in those frozen moments, smiling in a way I have never seen him smile. "Crawford's men killed her," he continues, his jaw tight with old rage. "A car bomb meant for my father that found her instead. My father spent the next 10 years hunting Crawford's people, and when Crawford finally killed him too, the war became mine to finish. I reach for him then, sliding my arms around his waist and pressing my cheek to his chest, and I feel the tension in his body slowly release as he holds me. I was not supposed to feel anything again," he murmurs into my hair. "I was supposed to be stone and ice and vengeance, and then you walked into my warehouse with fire in your eyes, and I have been thawing ever since." I pull back to look at his face, at the vulnerability he is offering me like a gift, and I cup his jaw in my hands and make him see me. "That boy is still there," I tell him. "I see him every time you look at Lily, every time you hold me, every time you choose mercy over cruelty. You are not the monster you think you are, Alexander Ravenscroft. You are the man who lowered his gun." He kisses me then, slow and deep and full of things neither of us has words for. And when he leads me to his bedroom, I go willingly, choosing him with my whole heart. We come together in the darkness with a tenderness that undoes me, his hands reverent on my skin, my fingers tracing the scars that map his history. And in the tangle of sheets and whispered words, we build something new from the wreckage of everything we have lost. Afterward, he traces patterns on my shoulder and tells me about his mother's garden and the songs she used to sing, and I tell him about my sister's laugh and the way Lily has her eyes. We share our griefs like secrets, and in the sharing they become lighter. Tomorrow he goes to war. Tonight we have this. Tonight we have each other. And I know with a certainty that settles in my bones that whatever happens next, I will never regret choosing him. He leaves before dawn while I am still tangled in the sheets that smell like him, and his kiss on my forehead is soft, but his eyes are already the eyes of a predator, cold and focused and ready for blood, and I want to pull him back and beg him to stay. But I know this war has been building since before I ever walked into that warehouse, and he cannot run from it any more than I could run from the moment Lily stepped between a gun and her father. Charlotte finds me in the kitchen an hour after sunrise, staring at cold coffee I cannot bring myself to drink, and she sits beside me without speaking, and takes my hand, and we wait together in the silence of women who have loved dangerous men and learned to survive the waiting. Lily wakes cheerful and oblivious, asking for pancakes and cartoons, and I make myself smile and flip batter in a pan and pretend my heart is not a clenched fist of terror in my chest. The morning crawls past in agonizing increments, each minute stretched thin as wire, and I check my phone obsessively, even though Alexander told me there would be no contact until it was over. No risk of signals being traced or communications intercepted, just silence and faith and the unbearable weight of not knowing. Charlotte tries to distract me with conversation, telling me stories about Alexander as a child, the brother who built her a treehouse, and taught her to ride a bike, and held her hand at their mother's funeral. And I cling to these glimpses of the boy he was, because they are the only anchor I have against the fear that I will never see the man he became again. Lily plays with dolls on the carpet, creating elaborate stories about princesses and dragons and brave knights, and I wonder if she understands on some level that our own story is being written in blood across the city while she arranges tiny plastic figures into happy endings. By noon, I am pacing, wearing a path in the carpet that probably costs more than my old apartment's rent, and Charlotte watches me with sympathy in her gentle eyes and does not tell me to calm down because she knows there is no calm to be found until he walks through that door. Henry calls once, his voice clipped and professional, to say the first phase is complete and Crawford's accounts are frozen, his money locked behind walls of legal seizure that I helped build with my knowledge of his networks, and I feel a fierce satisfaction even through my fear because I am not helpless anymore. I am not just waiting, I am part of this fight, even from here. The afternoon brings rain, a gray curtain that matches my mood, and Lily falls asleep on the couch, and I stand at the window watching the driveway and counting heartbeats. Then headlights cut through the gathering dusk, and a black car turns onto the estate road, and I cannot breathe, cannot move, cannot do anything but stand frozen as the door opens and a figure emerges in the rain. Alexander limps through the rain toward me, and I am already running, bursting through the front door and down the steps into the gray downpour, not caring that I am instantly soaked, caring only that he is here, he is alive, he is home. He catches me as I throw myself into his arms, and I feel him wince at the impact, and I pull back immediately, my hands flying to his face, his chest, cataloging the damage with frantic fingers, and I find a gash on his forehead, and blood staining his shirt beneath his jacket, and bruises already forming on his jaw. But his eyes are clear and warm and fixed on me like I am the only thing in the world worth seeing. "It is over," he says, his voice rough with exhaustion, and something that sounds like wonder. "Crawford is finished, and his empire is ash, and you are safe. Lily is safe. You are both safe." I kiss him then, standing in the rain with water streaming down our faces, and I taste blood and victory, and the salt of tears I did not know I was crying, and when we finally break apart, he is smiling, actually smiling, the expression transforming his face into something almost boyish, despite the violence still visible on his skin. Charlotte appears in the doorway with Lily in her arms, and my daughter squirms free and runs toward us, on her small legs shouting his name. "Alexander! Alexander!" as if she has been waiting her whole short life to say it, and he releases me to crouch down and catch her, lifting her into his arms despite his injuries, and she wraps herself around him without fear, without hesitation, and I watch the predator hold my daughter, like she is made of glass and gold and everything precious. We go inside and Charlotte fusses over wounds while I make tea with shaking hands, and Lily chatters about her day as if the world has not been rewritten in blood and bullets. And in her obliviousness, I find a strange peace, because she is innocent still, she is whole still, she has been spared the nightmares that might have been. Later, after Henry arrives with news that Thomas has been released from all obligation and is waiting to see Lily tomorrow, after Charlotte retires with knowing eyes and my daughter falls asleep clutching a stuffed rabbit, Alexander and I stand in his study and he takes my hands in his and looks at me with the intensity that once terrified me and now feels like shelter. "I am not asking you to stay because of debt," he says, his voice low and certain. "That debt is paid 1,000 times over. I am asking you to stay because I cannot imagine this house without you in it, this life without you beside me, this heart without you holding it. I have been stone for so long, Eleanor, and you have made me remember what it is to be flesh, to be human, to be capable of something other than vengeance. Stay with me, choose me, not as a prisoner but as a partner, not as an obligation but as a choice, and I will spend every day earning that choice, protecting what we have built from the ashes of what Crawford tried to destroy. I look at this man who held a gun to my family and then lowered it for a child, who was my captor and became my protector, who showed me the monster and let me find the man beneath, and I know my answer has been written in every moment since that warehouse, in every touch and glance and whispered confession in the dark. I choose you, I tell him, and his eyes close like I have given him absolution, and when he kisses me, it tastes like beginning, like promise, like the first page of a story we will write together, in ink and starlight, and the fierce, stubborn miracle of love found in impossible places. The cage became a home, the monster became my shelter, and I am finally, impossibly, exactly where I belong.